Uh, there. Hello, I'm Gretchen Cook, Oregon State Board of Nursing Policy Analyst, and today I'm joined by Policy Analyst Laura Blackhurst. We thank you for joining us to learn about the updates made to Oregon's Nurse Practice Act, which went into effect on January 1st, 2026. So today's content consists of background information related to the updates and the updates themselves. So we're going to be touching on expiration date of newly issued OSBN licenses and certificates, updates to practice standards, and to standards on competency requirements for the purposes of license and certificate renewal and reinstatements. So with that, let's dive right into a little bit of background on the updates. The updates presented today are the result of House Bill 3044 of the 83rd Legislative Session. This was OSBN's bill in the 2025 regular session to update the Chapter 678 Oregon Revised Statutes, which are the foundation of Oregon's Nurse Practice Act. Like many statutes, the NPA statutes have been developed and revised over decades, leading to a patchwork of laws and rules, some of which no longer reflected current nursing standards or practices. So the bill itself focuses on three high-level buckets: alignment of statute, the removal of barriers, and modernization to reflect current and recognized nursing standards and practices. So an example that immediately comes to mind are the new requirements around continuing education as a measure of continued competence in the practice of nursing, which aligns Oregon with most other states, but a little bit more on that later. So up first, we have changes related to the expiration and renewal dates of newly issued licenses and certificates. So historically, and regardless of the date a new OSBN license or certificate was issued, the expiration date of that license or certificate was tied to the birth date of the applicant and whether the applicant was born in an odd number year or an even number year. So in some instances, the statutorily dictated time frame resulted in first-time license and certificate holders having to apply for renewal at full cost within a year or less of their initial issue date. So an equitable solution to this was proposed in House Bill 3044. So the solution, which took effect January 1, 2026, establishes that new licenses and certificates issued January 1 and forward are no longer tied to birth date. So that means going forward, newly issued licenses and certificates will expire 2 years after their issue date, thus granting a full 2 years of active licensed nursing practice or active certified nursing assistant work. Now, for those of us license and certificate holders whose expiration dates are already tied to our birth date, that expiration date will continue to be tied to your birth date. So next up, we have just a few updates related to RN and LPN practice standards. Now, these updates are limited, and all of them are related to use of the newly defined term healthcare provider. So where in most instances, the term healthcare provider is replacing the old term licensed independent practitioner, and that licensed independent practitioner or LIP has been removed from the standards. So as defined in Division 6 of the Practice Act, healthcare provider includes all of the previous provider types captured under the umbrella term of licensed independent practitioner or LIP, but also includes the physician associate, the provider type formerly known as a physician assistant. So the first impact of this term-related update is seen in the Division 45 standards, which establish requirements for clinical direction of LPN practice. So the practice of practical nursing used to only be permitted under the clinical direction of an RN plan of care or LIP's treatment plan. So the outcome of replacing LIP with healthcare provider is now clinical direction of LPN practice can also include direction by the physician associate treatment plan. Use of the term healthcare provider also impacts RN standards, but only those in two standards applicable to RNs in two specific practice environments. So the first is the RN in the school setting, specifically an RN employed by a school, education service district, or local public health authority to provide nursing services in a public or private school. So a little bit of background on this one. In 2015, the NPA statutes were revised to permit an RN in the school setting. to accept an order from an out-of-state licensed physician when that order was related to the care and treatment of a student who had been enrolled in the school for no more than 90 days. So as of January 1, 2026, the term physician is replaced with the term healthcare provider, which increases the provider types from whom the RN may accept an out-of-state order for a limited period of time. Now, the second one is an RN employed by or contracted with a long-term care facility or an in-home care agency. So in 2023, a similar statute to the one for the school RNs was enacted for this group of RNs. And so with the 2026 modernization updates, the term physician is replaced with the term healthcare provider, which broadens the pool of out-of-state licensed providers from whom the RN may execute a medical order for a client who has been a client for no more than 90 days. So this concludes the RN and LPN practice standards update, and I yield to policy analyst Laura Blackhurst, who will speak to OSBN's new competency requirements related to license and certificate renewals and reinstatements.
Good afternoon, everyone. The competence requirements are some of the biggest changes that OSBN license and certificate holders should be aware of. Key is that continuing education will now be required for renewals and reinstatements. And on our upcoming slides, we'll have more details on those specific requirements for your license or certificate type, as well as a breakdown of exactly when those new requirements go into effect. However, a really exciting outcome of this change is that nurses and nursing assistants will no longer need to track their practice or work hours as part of the license or certification renewal process. Now, next slide, please. The continuing education requirements we assumed would lead to two major questions. First, what will count as continuing education? Nurses can use any type of continuing education that is related to the practice of nursing. And this means that continuing education that occurs in your workplace, from your employer, self-study activities, academic coursework, or the accredited CE courses with which many of us are already familiar would be acceptable examples of continuing education. The other question you may have is around how to show proof of this continuing education. Well, when CE is required, then you should retain any records that can demonstrate the continuing education has been completed. For most, this will be the certificate of completion stating the hours and topics, but again, could also include meeting agendas or objectives for an educational training or proof of attendance. For the self-study type activities, we have a form on the OSBN website where you can document the type of activity and its relation to your nursing practice and context. So these records may be uploaded to your nurse portal account as an easy place to store this information. Now with that, I'm going to hand it back to Policy Analyst Cook to go through these new requirements.
Hey, thank you, Policy Analyst Blackhurst. So first up are the requirements for RN and LPN licensure renewal. So as of January 1, 2026, practice hours are no longer a requirement for renewal of an RN or LPN license. Going forward, the board's aligning with other nursing regulatory bodies across the nation and employing continuing education as the measure of continued competence in the practice of nursing. So what does this mean for the OSBN licensed RN and LPN who renew their license in 2026 or in 2027? For those who renew their licenses between January 1, 2026 through December 31st, 2027, those applicants do not have to attest to practice hours. The requirement for renewal in 2026 and 2027 is completion of your 1 hour pain management continuing education and 2 hours of cultural competency continuing education. Then, effective January 1, 2028, additional continuing education requirements for licensure renewal go into effect. Beginning January 1, 2028, renewal applicants will be required to have completed 20 hours of continuing education within the 2 years immediately preceding their application submission. Now, these 20 hours can include any pain management and any cultural competency continuing education completed during the same time period, meaning in the 2 years preceding the application, renewal application submission. Now, those who are interested can find these competence requirements for RN and LPN license renewal in Division 31 of the Practice Act, as well as in the competency requirement fact sheet available on the board's website. And links to both are provided in the video description below. So let's move on to Advanced Practice Registered Nurse licensure. So the big change related to licensing rules for the nurse practitioner, the clinical nurse specialist, and the certified registered nurse anesthetist is that relocation of APRN licensing rules into Division 31 of the Practice Act. So this means that Division 653 has been repealed and all nurse license rules for all nurse license types are now located in Division 31. So let's see, speaking of Division 31, this brings us to Nurse Emeritus license requirements. So for those not familiar with the Nurse Emeritus license, it's a reduced fee license that grants its owner permission to engage in full scope of practical nursing practice or full scope of registered nursing practice in a volunteer or non-compensatory basis. So the first update is the increase in the length of time a license is active. So the RN Emeritus and LPN Emeritus license issued January 1, 2026 and forward are now good for 2 years from the date of issue. The second update is on continuing education requirements for the Emeritus licensure applicant. As of January 1, 2026, the Nurse Emeritus applicant is required to have completed the 1-hour pain management continuing education within 36 months preceding their application and complete 2 hours of cultural competency education within the 48 months preceding their application. Then, beginning January 1, 2028, the Emeritus licensure applicant must complete 10 hours of continuing education within the 2 years preceding their application submission. And these required 10 hours can include any pain management and any cultural competency continuing education hours that were completed during the 2 years preceding their application submission. So this brings us to updates to CNA and CMA certification renewal. So for the Certified Nursing Assistant, or CNA, as of January 1, 2026, CNA certificate renewal no longer requires 400 hours of work in a paid CNA position. The applicant must, however, still complete the required 2 hours of cultural competency continuing education within the 48 months preceding their application submission. For the Certified Medication Aid, or CMA, work hours performing CMA duties are no longer a requirement for CMA certification renewal. However, the completion of 8 hours of continuing education related to medication aid authorized duties within the 2 years preceding the renewal application submission remains a requirement. So this brings us to the last updates, which cover late license and certificate renewals and reinstatements. So for late renewals, as of January 1, a renewal application is deemed or considered late when it is submitted 1 to 90 days following the license or certificate expiration date, and a fee is applied to the late renewal application on the first day of expiration. And just as required with a timely renewal, a late renewal applicant must meet the continuing education requirements for the license or certificate type sought. For late reinstatements, when a person's license or certificate has been expired for more than 90 days, reinstatement is the process by which must be used to reinstate that license or certificate. Now, the specifics on reinstatement requirements are going to be based on the type of license or certificate sought, as well as the length of time that license or certificate has been expired. So for RN, LPN, and APRN licensure reinstatement requirements, those are located in Division 31 of the Practice Act. For CNA and CMA certification reinstatement requirements, those are located in Division 62 of the Practice Act. So this concludes our updates related to the 2026 Oregon Nurse Practice Act modernization. And at this time, we'd like to draw your attention to the multiple update-related as well as other resources available on the board's website, with links to all of them provided in the video description below. These resources include information about the statute and rule changes we just discussed, frequently asked questions, as well as the continuing education requirement fact sheet addressed by Laura. So at this time, the board's policy and executive teams thank you for watching, and we thank you for the work that you do to keep Oregon healthy and safe.